CNBC TV 18, in partnership with BMR Associates, did a comprehensive poll of the country's top business leaders to assess the mood. Joining us in our studios, Gokul Chaudhary and Rajiv Dimri of BMR Associates. They have been the driving force behind this entire exercise. Also with us from Delhi, Naina Lal Kidwai, chairperson at Max Financial Services. From Kolkata, Harshvardhan Neotia, the president of the industry body FICCI, and Saurabh Majumdar, the managing editor of Forbes India. Appreciate you all joining us here on the show. Gokul and Rajiv, let me start by asking you very quickly to take us through the methodology, the time spent on conducting this poll. And I also want to point out, for the benefit of our viewers, that this poll was completed before things like the bankruptcy code were passed through by Parliament. So that perhaps is not really reflected in the poll. Gokul.
You're absolutely right, Shireen. We did this poll over a period of 3 to 4 weeks, and that sort of ended 2 weeks ago. And this was just before we had the Parliament passing the bankruptcy code, which was much awaited, and also before the Mauritius-India protocol got signed, which of course has led investors to find greater certainty insofar as the treaty is concerned. So some of those announcements happened
came in after the poll was done. Okay, but do you believe that the poll would have reflected very different numbers, Rajiv, or would it be along expected lines, which is what the key findings seem to suggest?
It would not have materially altered. So while these are two important developments, as Gokul is talking about, but they would not have materially altered the overall sentiment. For few investors, these are extremely big events, but in a sense, it passes a certain message in the market. So I don't think that this findings of this poll are materially different from what we would have expected.
Okay, all right, so let's get straight to it now. The first question that we asked as part of the CNBC TV 18 BMR CEO poll: are you satisfied with the steps that the government has taken to create an attractive business environment? A resounding majority, 67% saying yes, 29% saying no, and about 4% are undecided. Harshvardhan Neotia, let me start by asking you, if one were to talk to industry leaders in private, at least at the start of the year, the sense was that, there should be much more momentum. But that feeling now, I get a sense that has changed. There is now a perceptible difference when one talks to business leaders. There is a sense of confidence about the turn that the economy seems to be taking. Your comments on the 2 years that have just concluded and the attractiveness of the business environment today?
Well, I think they have been rather good 2 years of the government from an economic standpoint. I think the government started off with a very clear vision of trying to build the foundation of what they thought would be a robust economic future for the country. And they looked at ease of doing business, they looked at investment in infrastructure, they looked at various other issues that are critical for the building blocks of the industry and development and all of that. And then, whether it's the fiscal deficit target containment or, looking at taming the inflation numbers, etc. So I see that all these different activities that have happened over these couple of years are now coming to a point when they should start yielding fruits. It's like a tree being planted and then takes a while to grow and then the fruits to come. And, we've had 2 bad monsoons, so that has been a bit of a dampener. God willing, this monsoon, hopefully, as it seems to be predicted, would be normal. And if that is the case, I do see a very, very strong uptick happening from October onwards.
Okay, so you are expecting a significant takeoff or a lift-off in the economy starting October, and that's the sense that we're getting from other business leaders as well. Naina, you just heard what Mr. Neotia had to say. If I were to ask you to summarize for us how you would assess the performance over the last 2 years, on the macros, clearly the government has done a lot, of course, supported by the fact that oil prices have come off significantly, and also in terms of long-term structural reforms, perhaps not visible in the short term, but the foundations have been laid. How would you summarize the performance?
Shireen, so I think it's in your question, and I would agree that the foundations are actually well set. Initially, a lot of announcements, some disappointment in the early period that things were not happening fast enough. But I do believe we're beginning to see the outcomes, all of which are happening now in terms of the very significant developments on the bankruptcy bill. I think the real estate bill also is important in terms of creating a very healthy real estate environment going forward. The bankruptcy bill itself will play out over time, but directionally right. clarity on Mauritius, which was looming large, and it's good that we've got that out of the way. And infrastructure, which fortunately now at least we're seeing some parts of infrastructure moving ahead. Roads is of course a great story. Rail coming back on track, and in fact looking quite interesting going forward in terms of PPPs that may come up there. And the power sector, where whether it's renewables or indeed traditional power, there is movement ahead. And all of this leads and contributes to growth going forward.
All right, let's now talk about the best programs to create long-term growth. That was the next question that we asked. And it's no surprises, but the number one that has emerged in terms of the programs that will hopefully create long-term growth, Make in India, followed by the Jan Dhan Yojana, Skill India coming in at number 3, Digital India coming in at number 4, Startup India at number 5, Irrigation and Crop Insurance at 6. Narendra, let me start by asking you, there's been so much that's been made about Make in India and so on and so forth. Yes, we've seen FDI numbers go up. Domestic private investment is yet to take off because obviously it's going to chase demand, and demand continues to be tepid at this point in time. But do you believe that enough has changed on the ground despite all the hoopla around Make in India?
I think, Shireen, there's a mixed story there. One, of course, is if demand goes up, capacity utilization goes up, and we will begin to see investment. But let's not forget that a lot of the push is happening now at the states level, and where industry and where the rubber really hits the road is at the state level. And each state, in this spirit of competitive federalism, is reaching out to industry, but the record of each state is really a mixed one, some doing better than others. And I think that is where there is more work needed so that India as a whole is seen as a friendly business environment. I think the second area where there was a lot of hope was in the whole area of defense, which has been quite a slow starter in terms of clarity and what was required, because in fact the Make in India work and investment around defense would indeed be huge.
Now the government, DIPP Interministerial Committee had actually recommended that yes, Apple should be given a waiver from the 30% domestic local sourcing norms, but now we find out that the FIPB doesn't agree with the DIPP Interministerial Committee or with the nodal ministry, that's the Department of Electronics and IT. Do you believe that we're sending out confusing signals or confusing messages here? Are we also perhaps at some level tying ourselves up in knots over this Make in India business?
No. I think the way I look at it is that this is all about seeing that we have a level playing field between international operators coming into India and Indian people or Indian companies operating. So I think everyone is looking at some of these legitimate concerns that are popping up, and I'm sure that in a few weeks or months they will be able to find a ground which is suitable and reasonable from every point of view.
Would you rate this any differently? Would your top program be Make in India? As I said, Jan Dhan at 2, Skills at 3, Digital India 4, Startup India 5, Irrigation and Crop Insurance 6. Is that how you would rate them as well?
Well, I think Make in India apart, I would definitely feel the Jan Dhan Yojana has been a major game changer, can prove to be a major game changer going forward. Of course, Startup India is another major one if you really focus on these areas, because in the absence of organizational job creation growing in the manner in which it is supposed to, startup and entrepreneurship is going to really hold the key to creating of new jobs, and otherwise where are the jobs going to really come from? Digital India, Skilling India, in fact are in a sense linked to Startup India, particularly the skilling aspect of it.
Raju, let me start by asking you, how would you rate these programs, and do you concur with the poll findings?
Yes, in the conversation that we had with people, the emphasis was what is likely to provide the long-term fiscal benefit, and that's what the people are focusing on. And if you look at these programs, the Make in India program has the potential of touching lives across the board. Whereas, while the other programs are all good, but they tend to touch fewer lives, important of course, but Make in India gets into the whole, from grassroots to the top end, and that I think is the reason why it has made number 1.
So long-term implications of Make in India ensuring that it's number 1 there, Gokul.
Absolutely. And in our conversations with various respondents, it's not that we came across any program which they felt was on the wrong track. So I think while we're talking about everything that's going right, it wasn't that corporate India felt that there is something which the government had really embarked on a large scale, which is negative. So in that sense, it's also in a positive that most of the programs are well directed.
Welcome back. You're watching this special CNBC TV18 BMR CEO poll as we're discussing the performance of the Modi government. This is an exhaustive poll that has been done by BMR for CNBC TV18. We're now going to talk about the best performing ministries, and no surprises there that the key economic ministries have found their way into the best performing ministries list. So it's the road and highways, power and coal, defense, finance and railways. Those are the best performing ministries as per the poll. Let's just bring up Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, because of course one of the key sort of minds in this government not just looks after the economic aspects but also looks after the political dynamics. Nana, let me start by asking you, if I were to ask you about the crucial pieces of legislation that have been pushed through by this government, a lot of them are economic legislations driven, of course, by the Finance Ministry. The bankruptcy code we've just discussed, the big hope is on the GST now. The Finance Minister in his interview telling me that enough is enough and they hope to go ahead, get the Congress on board, but if the Congress doesn't come on board, they hope to push it through in the next session of Parliament. How would you assess the performance of the Finance Ministry?
I think it's been quite stellar in terms of some of these new bills that have found their way in. The issue, of course, remains around tax, which we've seen from your survey as well, that industry certainly believes from the survey that more needs to be done, and that would fall squarely in the Finance Ministry. So I hope that they would give that some attention. And I think in terms of also the way India is positioned offshore, responsible in terms of maintaining the fisc and not having succumbed to some of the asks around, maybe loosening up there, are all indications that India is held in very high regard today because we have showed good, sensible fiscal policies as well. So I would say, all in all, very good.
So on the issue of Piyush Goyal, Mr. Neotia, let me ask you, because a lot of things have been done both across the Power Ministry as well as the Coal Ministry. Of course, coal production at a record high, Coal India's performance again at a historic high. How would you rate the performance of the coal and power sector?
Well, in one line, outstanding. I think in this short period, they've done some incredible amount of work. I was recently going through a brochure that sort of listed out the achievements of the Power and Coal Ministry, and it looks very, very impressive what they have been able to achieve, right from electrification down to the village level, finding a solution to the ailments of the discoms, looking at bringing affordable power, putting transparency into the mechanism of allocation of scarce resources, etc. I think it has been a very comprehensive and extremely worthwhile and productive tenure of Mr. Goyal.
Your take on Manohar Parrikar and the Defence Ministry and how it's now addressing this opportunity?
So I think clearly on the right track. It is not easy to get a whole new sector into a private sector attractive mode, and the whole ministry all the way down the line needs to move. I do think though that a lot needs to be done there. I would actually really see it as a ministry that is beginning to grapple with the issues, but we haven't really seen it happening at the sort of levels that the expectations were. And unfortunately tied into this is the whole issue of the state of our banks and financing. So for some of the companies that had entered into the areas of defense, the whole issue of government being very, it will pay finally, but it's a very slow paymaster. And when this happens at a time when industry itself is over leveraged and needing the liquidity and money, it doesn't help. So government's own record and speed of payment in all ministries, including when we go into large projects in defense, is going to be something that is addressed alongside all the regulations as they are sought to be changed.
Let's now talk about Nitin Gadkari, and I think there is consensus that as far as the Roads and Highways Ministry is concerned, there has been significant momentum. In fact, a lot of the uptick that we're seeing in the economy is largely on account of the backlog or the stalled projects that have been cleared in the Roads and Highways sector. Saurav, how would you assess it?
I would definitely agree with this, because I think Nitin Gadkari has done a marvelous job, and if you speak to some of the large CEOs of some of the largest banks, even they will agree that, you know, there's the roads sector has really been able to free up a lot of the legacy of the past and get some projects moving. And if you see the figures of the new roads, the kilometers, etc., I think the story speaks for itself. I think Nitin Gadkari deserves definitely a big pat on the back for the way he's worked over the last 2 years.
Absolutely, record adding of kilometers every day under Nitin Gadkari, and of course a lot of changes to the model concession agreements and so on and so forth to clean up the backlog and the stalled projects. Your comments on the list so far, Gokul?
Well, I think the combined effect of what we are seeing in defense, what we are seeing in the roads and ports, and we are seeing in the power and so forth, all of that collectively was reflected by the fact that 60% of the respondents said are very happy with how the infrastructure policy is moving. And that's quite a shift, because, you know, the last 2 years of the UPA government was, you know, all about policy paralysis. And, you know, now we've got a situation where 60% are reflecting their satisfaction with the momentum that's being built up.
Nana, it's going to be crucial for ministries like the Railway Ministry to really kickstart their capex plans, and significant amounts of money involved there, which is really going to also benefit or have a multiplier impact as far as the economy is concerned. And it's not easy turning things like the Indian Railways around, but as I said, at least directionally now, we seem to be on a clear path.
And not just a clear path, I think the fact that we've actually welcomed investment, so we are going to see a lot more foreign companies